What's up, horror fans? Anchor Pete here, and it is time to talk about Fear Street, Part 1, 1994. So, you know what? Danny and I have been kind of excited about this movie series for Netflix because it's not just one movie that's coming out, it's a trilogy of movies, and it's one per week. I don't think Netflix has done something like this yet. I gotta say that I am a fan of R.L. Stine. I loved the Goosebumps books when I was growing up. My daughter, Pepper, who is 10, she's a huge fan of R.L. Stine too, and we had that bond. Pepper and I have also seen the two Goosebumps movies, the first one with Jack Black, and he's also in the second one, Haunted Halloween. You know, even though the second one's not that great, the first one's a lot of fun. Those two Goosebumps movies really remind me of this film trilogy too, and I'm going to go into that and explain where's that connection. I started tweeting right away, right off the bat, some complaints I had about this movie as I was watching it. And I feel a little bit of regret about that because you know what? I started to like this movie more and more as we got deeper and deeper into it. And I got to say that by the end of the movie, I'm excited about part two. From now on, for the rest of this review, it's going to be spoiler central. So if you haven't seen Fear Street Part 1, 1994, just go on Netflix and watch it. And then you can tell us in the comments what you thought about it. And each installment is directed by Lei Janiak, and she's this director I haven't heard of before, but I know that she directed this other like horror thriller called Honeymoon, which came out in 2014. She's directed every installment, and she also co-wrote each installment with a guy named Phil. I'm going to mess up his last name. Phil Gaziadeh. Gaziadeh, sure. They wrote each installment, and each installment takes place in a different year. You have this one, which took place in 1994. Then you have the next installment, which takes place in 1978, and the final installment, which comes out, I guess, 2 weeks from now, is it takes place in the year 1666. Oh, the number of the beast. And you know, it's cool. Speaking of the number of the beast, there's an Iron Maiden song in this movie. 10 minutes in, I'm pretty excited. They played Fear of the Dark, which is a favorite of mine. Anyway, this is based on the Fear Street series that R.L. Stine wrote. And that series, according to their Wikipedia, I don't know how accurate this is, it has sold 80 million copies of the book, making it the most successful young adult series of all time. Now, I don't know if that's true, you know, comparing it to like Hunger Games and Twilight and all those kind of books too, but you never know. I know kids eat up the Goosebumps stuff. They didn't base this movie or any of the movies in the trilogy on a specific Fear Street book. They just wanted to capture the feeling of those Fear Street books, and they did take stuff from the mythology. Like, there's a whole section of Fear Street books. There's a 16-book saga called the Fear Street Saga that follows this one family, and their last name is literally Fear, Fear. There's a member of that family who gets married to a guy whose last name is Good. It's very literal in this series, right? But it's good with the E. They want to get rid of this curse that's on the town of Shadyside, which the Fear family lives in. And so that's all in the book series. The Shady Side is in this movie trilogy as well. That's the name of the town that all these murders take place in. Now, in the very beginning, we have a cold open that is very reminiscent of Scream. I mean, it felt almost just like, oh, we're watching another Scream movie. There's this girl that works in the mall, and the mall kind of looks like the set of Stranger Things, the mall set from season 3. She's in the mall, and she's working in a bookstore by herself. She's completely alone. There's no other staff member working in the bookstore. Now, I've worked in like 5 different bookstores in my lifetime, and I gotta say, usually there's not just one staff member working it, even if it's in a mall. She's sitting there, and she's closing up the store, and she asked this one guy to drive her home. And she calls his store, and he's working in like Spencer Gifts, and he has a blow-up doll. I don't remember them having blow-up dolls in Spencer Gifts, but for the sake of this movie, I guess they do. Well, just a little spoiler, the guy turns out to be this killer that has this skull mask, and he chases after her kind of the way that Ghostface chases after the girls in the Scream movies. You know, he kind of stumbles a little bit, but he is able to catch up to her, and he's able to stab her right as she's about to leave the mall. But he gets shot in the head, and he gets shot in the head by the town sheriff. And the town sheriff's last name, by the way, is Good, just like that family in the books. So with that guy's death, you kind of don't know what direction they're going with this movie. And within the first half of the movie, it's hard to kind of determine, okay, what are they trying to do with this? Is this a supernatural thing? Is it going to be like another Scream movie? Like, what's the catch here? And only when you finally learn what the real threat is and what the story is going to be about, which is kind of around the halfway point, that's when it really starts to get enjoyable. Otherwise, I was kind of tuning out and not really into it at first. One of the things that turned me off at first was they really rammed that 90s nostalgia right down your throat. Now, I mentioned this in my tweets, but a lot of movies that take place in previous decades, like let's say Cruella, which took place in the 60s, or I think it was 60s, right? Yeah, 60s or 70s, they just like shove songs from that era just like down your throat. And it's not even like, here's one song and then we're gonna have dialogue and a couple of different scenes. Nope, it's like, here's a little montage with this song, and then here's a little montage with this song. And it's just like, oh, you remember this song? You remember this song? And it's just one on top of the other. And it's just like, what are you trying to do? Like evoke this feeling of that time? Because you can reference things. You can say things like, oh, AOL Instant Messenger, we must be in the 90s, right? But that's not how you set like an atmosphere. It's just basically trying to be like, we know this is from the 90s, we know this. And so, like, within the first 20 minutes or so, they play at least 15 songs from the 90s. It starts off with Closer by Nine Inch Nails, which I'm never going to object to that. I love Nine Inch Nails. They play I'm Only Happy When It Rains by Garbage. They do play Fear of the Dark by Iron Maiden, which I thought that was an excellent touch. They play some Rob Zombie. They play Creep by Radiohead. It's a good choice of music on all these songs. But, you know, I grew up in the 90s, right? I was born in the 80s, but I was a teenager in the 90s. And I feel like this was really aimed at me, this particular sequence or this movie. And it just feels like it's kind of patronizing. In the first half, you're introduced to the idea of this town and the idea that there's been serial killers pretty much like once a generation, maybe even multiple times a generation. And it seems that the town is cursed by this witch that was hung in 1666. And you see that there's this town that's right next to the shady side. I forget what, I didn't write down the name of the town, but it was something like Sunnydale or something like that, where it's like they're the bright, preppy, rich town. They're right next to the shitty, shady town, right? And you have this love story between our main character, Dina, who's played by Kiana Madeira. I thought she did a decent job. And then there's Olivia Welch, who plays Samantha Fraser. So you have Sam and Dina, right? They both grew up in Shadyvale, but Sam ends up moving to the sunny, preppy, rich people town. Well, the two of them are lesbians. And as someone growing up in the 90s, I know that even up till 1994, which this movie takes place, that still was kind of taboo at that point. And so them having a teenage lesbian relationship was kind of controversial. And Sam's mother, you can see throughout this movie, doesn't want the two of them together. And she kind of blames any kind of problems that Sam has had on Dina. So Dina confronts Sam and she blames her for moving to the other town. I'm not sure how like a girl has an influence on her family moving to another town, but she gets really mad at her, and she's, you know, mad that she chose to go live in this sunny town, and that she has a boyfriend now, and that she's sort of in denial about her, you know, feelings for Dina. At the rally or the football game between the shady side people and the sunny people, a fight breaks out because the sunny people are basically talking smack about shady side. You know, all these people are murdered here. This place sucks. And there's a fight. The shady side people go onto a bus and they're leaving, and this Sam and her boyfriend and another guy follow them in a car, right? And they got those skull masks on to kind of taunt them. Well, on the bus, you have this girl, Kate, who kind of riles everyone up on the bus, and then they go to throw a whole bucket of like Kool-Aid onto the car behind them, and it kind of causes an accident, right? And in the accident, Sam is bleeding, and she's kind of crawling around in the dirt, by the car, and it looks like she disturbs the grave of Sarah Fear, who's that witch that was hung, right? We later find out, and I'm talking like 20, 30 minutes later or more, that because she disturbed the site and because her blood found the witch's bones, that's why these killers are coming after her, Sam, and basically trying and going through anyone that's around her. Okay, so up until that point, it's just sort of the standard kind of slasher where there's these killers just kind of coming through and killing innocent people that are in the way, and you don't know why they're attacking or who they're truly after. And once you find out that Sam is the target, that's when the movie really kicks into high gear and it gets a lot more appealing, in my opinion. And I didn't even like the main characters that much, but once they kind of band together to try to protect Sam, that's when it gets a lot more like where you enjoy them a lot more. I think because of like It and the modern version of It, but even just It, the Stephen King book, right? Stephen King always said that he wanted to make a monster that was like all the monsters in one. He wanted to make a monster that could be the Mummy and the Wolfman, right? And so it's not just like one creature attacking you one way. I think that like a lot of modern horror movies and even sort of gateway to horror movies like Goosebumps, they have this kind of concept of like there's some kind of evil and it's making all these different types of killers come after you, these different types of monsters. So you have this sort of smorgasbord or like buffet style of monsters and killers. I think that it's probably either like unintentional or intentional because the way that our kids are and our culture, we have all these options where we can constantly, we can watch Freddy right now. We can watch Michael Myers. We can watch an alien invasion movie. Just get on our phone. We can watch it right away. And I think that that's kind of seeped into our movies because we don't have necessarily the attention span to focus on just one killer that has one type of MO, like they want their style or the way they kill you. One monster kills you a certain way. It's like now we can have 6 different types of monsters. And so if you're getting bored with this one type, here comes another one. It can be fun, but I've seen a lot of examples of that in the past 3 or 4 years, especially working for this channel. Danny and I, we covered Annabelle Comes Home a couple of days ago as part of our Conjuring review, right? Or Conjuring ranking. And in that, Danny brought up this point that Chris said, which was that movie is sort of like Night at the Museum, where it's like you get everything at once, right? And I think that's happening a lot in horror movies. Like in Annabelle Comes Home, you have the ferryman killer, you have the bride, you have the demon that's connected to Annabelle, right? You have this weird like werewolf thing. It's all in this movie that's an Annabelle movie. And of course, then you have the Goosebumps movies that I mentioned before. The whole premise of those movies is that these kids unlock R.L. Stine's books and all of his monsters come out and attack at once. So it's not just one R.L. Stine monster at a time, it's all of his monsters at a time. And so this movie's the same kind of thing. It's not just one Fear Street type killer. It's the guy with the axe, and it's the crazy woman with like the razor, the shaver blade, right? And it's also this like skull mask kind of ghost face type killer. So it's fun, but I just get worried about our attention spans in general. And like, do we really have it in us to watch a horror movie where it's just one monster and it kills you a certain way? Like, is this generation able to appreciate that? I wonder. What do you think? Tell me in the comments. The other thing I wanted to bring up real quick is that I didn't really care about the characters at first, but then the more invested they became in Sam and the more they worked together as a team, the more I began to like them. Especially Kate, who just seemed sort of like this, kind of tough girl that didn't care about anybody. She became more and more likable, and she gets along with Dina's brother, Josh. He's the Iron Maiden fan, by the way. And she even kind of has this little romance with him, and it really endears you to her. Well, she ends up dying, and her death is very brutal. And I was telling Sherry this before, that it's not very common in horror movies when they'll kill a character that they know the audience likes, or the audience has grown to like. Yes, they will do it, but a lot of times it won't be like a truly gruesome death. Like a lot of times they save the gruesome death for the unlikable characters, right? But in this case, she's fighting the skull mask killer. He stabs her, and then they're kind of struggling, and he puts her on this conveyor belt. They're in a grocery store, right? And she's on a conveyor belt, and there's that bread slicer, and so her head goes into the bread slicer, and it just like kind of cuts up her head, and like brains and stuff come flying out the side, and that's pretty brutal for like a teenage girl just to begin with. But then, like for this teenage girl that you sort of start to develop feelings for, it's jarring for me. And here's spoilers for Scream 2. It kind of reminds me of like when Randy got killed in Scream. You're not really expecting Randy to Scream 2. You're not expecting Randy to get killed, but then when Randy gets taken out, it's pretty brutal, and it's almost like a little, like you see him dead for a second, and then they just cut away. It's very sudden and brutal, and it's that kind of killing of like a beloved character that kind of lingers with you. And they also killed this other guy. His name is Simon. He's kind of like the comedic relief in the movie, and they take him out pretty much like within 60 seconds of Kate's death too. Like one of the funny things about Simon is that he's always raving about the grocery store that the end scene is in. He's always talking about how great it is, and then when they finally get to the grocery store, you like see pictures of the employee of the month, and they're all just Simon's picture. Like I like little touches like that. And he had one or two funny lines. Also, like at one point when they're in the school and they realize that Sam's blood is what the monsters are drawn to, they all change into clothes in the Lost and Found section, and he's wearing like this woman's like low V-cut V-neck shirt. It's real funny looking. The first half I think could have been a little tighter, or maybe they made a few different choices in the first half just to kind of make the character seem more appealing, and also just in general throughout the whole movie, there's a lot of choices that characters make that you're like, okay, well, they wouldn't do that. They're not that dumb. They like, and the kids are able to steal an ambulance from a hospital at one point. You're like, okay, so there's no police that notice this. No one's looking for them. No one notices that an ambulance has been stolen from the hospital. It's little nitpicking things like that. But when you see a whole bunch of examples like that throughout a movie, you're like, okay, come on, like just try a little harder. Like, don't make the character seem that dumb, or don't make all the adults in the movie seem inept like that. So that's my review for Fear Street 1994. I enjoyed it. I'm hoping the next one is good. It looks sort of like a summer camp slasher, a la Jason and sleepaway camp. But I hope that you guys watched it too, and I'd love to see what you can say about it in the comments. And we're just going to keep pumping out some more horror content your way throughout this summer.